I like being the bearer of very good news today. So these are GPUs that you can actually consider getting. So in honor of the number 7 today, here are the 7 things that I think you'll want to know. Welcome to Machines and More. So timing is everything, right? Maybe you're off trying to get that 5070 right now, and hey, if you can snag an MSRP card, they're really not terrible, not great at the same time, but hey, if you strike out, this is the moment that I've been waiting for to tell you about these, because to be frank, it was very difficult to properly discuss the 5070 without the context of AMD's Radeon 9070 XT and 9070. So at least for the launch, I know you'll need to decide quickly, so I'll do this review a little bit differently. So I've already walked through some high-level specs in the announcement last week, so I'll go ahead and walk through some key points about these two cards. Both of these are Asus's Prime series, just like the 5070 that I reviewed yesterday. And I'll go ahead and weave the benchmarks into the talking points. If you need a TLDR, here it is. If you can find the 9070 or 9070 XT at close to MSRP, just get it. I would get that over the 5070 Ti or 5070. You can't go wrong with either, although I do have a personal preference that I won't tell you about just yet. So before we begin, big thanks to Asus for providing the review units for the 9070 XT OC and 9070 OC models here. I am not paid by them to review these. They're not a sponsor for this video, and you can expect a fair and objective review as always. Okay, first thing to know. Performance with these cards is great. Fantastic. AMD's RDNA 4 GPUs are on TSMC's N4P. The main target here is the gaming market, and I will lead with rasterization. No ray tracing, no smoke and mirrors. The 9070 XT, it just performs more or less like a 5070 Ti, and the 9070, it beats out the 5070. In the synthetic benchmarks, the 9070 XT is behind in superposition and 3D Mark Port Royal. It's ahead in 3D Mark Times by Extreme. The 9070 is consistently ahead of the 5070 in synthetics. Quick note here, I'll play through the individual gaming benchmarks as I talk here. Feel free to pause at any point. I will caveat, I'm testing with Asus's Tough OC for the 5070 Ti. Now these Prime 9070s are also slightly out of the box OC, although they're more modestly so. So, give or take, it's not going to change the general findings here too much, but kind of expect a smaller gap with a less out of the box OC 5070 Ti. Gaming tests are at 1440p highest settings. I'll pull an example before we talk about the geomean. So for Cyberpunk 2077, the 9070 XT goes toe-to-toe with the 5070 Ti. It's just a hair behind, and the 9070 is clearly better than the 5070. So as a whole, when I look at the non-ray traced benchmarks, you can clearly see what AMD was gunning for. The 9070 XT, it's within 4 percentage points of this factory OC 5070 Ti. So I'd expect somewhere around 3% for a more like-for-like AIB model. And the 9070 here is about 6% ahead of the 5070. Both of these are Asus Prime series with a slight factory OC. And if you were to compare the 9070 against a slightly out-of-the-box OC 5070, then it would be something like 5%. But then we're not talking about MSRP 5070 anymore, right? Second thing to know, the 9070 XT is about 10% additional performance over the 9070, but there's a little more than meets the eye. On paper, that sounds great, and that's good, right? And you might think that at $599 for the XT and $549 for the non-XT, it's kind of a no-brainer, right? But we do have to put these numbers into context, because the 9070 XT is one hungry puppy. You probably recall the announcement from AMD back at CES in January. Heck, I was there and I was confused by their messaging. They ultimately went back and fine-tuned things, and I wonder if it got cranked up to 11 during that process. This particular AIB drew down 317 watts of total board power versus AMD's spec at 304, and that is a big difference versus the 5070 Ti. Even if we are talking equivalent performance, then it is still going to come with additional operating consequences versus the lower powered 5070 Ti. The 9070 XT is somewhat relying on this extra power to catch or at least get close to the 5070 Ti. Now, you may not care too much about that, and your thought process may be, as long as it comes in well cheaper than the 900 or so that the 5070 Ti's are seemingly going for, right? So yeah, no problem with that logic either. Versus the 9070, the XT model draws down a whopping additional 94 watts of power at the wall. So figure you are drawing down 24% more system power for an additional 10% of gains. To me, the 9070 XT is pushed beyond that sweet spot of efficiency, whereas the 9070 seems to occupy a really good spot. The base spec from AMD is 220 watts, and the Prime OC that I tested, it gets a little bit more gas at 230. So figure that this one beats out the 5070 while drawing a little less power. That's not to say don't get the XT if you need the additional performance. Sure, in fact, the silicon here with the 9070 XT is still better. Consider that when I ran the 9070 XT at a reduced power level to match the 9070, it still performed better. However, if you don't need the extra performance anyway and you want a cooler or quieter system for a solid mid-range build, I would not mind just saving $50, right? So with them being priced so close together, I do get the impression that AMD wants you to spring for the XT, and that there may just not be as many 9070s readily available at launch. But personally, for most gamers that just want a good out-of-the-box experience, I like the non-XT more, since I think it's a good balance of things. It's a very solid 1440p card, and not knowing how your particular system is set up, the power that it draws is going to be more manageable without doing too many system changes there. So that's going to be my personal pick. Number 3. Thermals on the 9070 and 9070 XT should be decent. With the Prime coolers, they're great, and you should be able to get AMD's spec boost clocks on these. 2970 and 2520 is a spec on the XT and non-XT respectively. Asus's Prime spec is 3030 and 2610 for OC mode in their GPU Tweak 3 application. But these cards are already pretty close out of the box, as you can see, without intervention, so yeah, you may not need to do that. These two Asus models use the same Prime cooler. Now, it looks just like the one on the 5070 Prime, but this is actually a better cooler. It's got, well, I can show you because it's really easy to take out the cooler. It's got an extra heat pipe here. So there's 5, and it's a little bit longer and wider at 312 millimeters long and 130 millimeters wide versus 304 length and 126 millimeters wide on the 5070. There's no SFF ready enthusiast designation for marketing purposes, so I can see why they went ahead and stretched the dimensions a little bit. You still have this very large flow-through section that's past the PCB. Triple dual ball bearing fans. This middle one does spin in the opposite direction. You got a phase change thermal pad, and you can easily drop the shroud like I did for whatever reason. You just need to take off a few screws. You don't have to decouple the heatsink. And I said it during the 5070 review, notwithstanding how NVIDIA has performed with their GPUs, the Asus Prime coolers have very much impressed me. They did a good job despite working with whatever NVIDIA sold to them. If you're a regular follower of the channel, you might be into smaller cases. I was able to fit this into the Terra, also without any issues. You just need to space out for a 50 millimeter thick card. The length is perfect here with a little bit of wiggle room. 9070 XT versus 9070. The 9070 XT is running a little bit cooler in this test. In this particular data point, the XT's fans had to run at 500 RPM faster. So it's not intrinsically cooler if you're just glancing at the graph. Both cards come in at a very workable temp. Still, I am moderately concerned about the memory temps. You typically want to be below 95 degrees for GDDR6, which it is, but it doesn't give much room for varying operating conditions or an ambient environment here. On the core temp, I actually second guessed how cool these temps were measuring in for a moment, but I did get corroboration on this, so I feel a little bit better reporting on this. I did notice a little bit wider hotspot delta there, but apparently that's fine. So as mentioned earlier, more performance, a lot more power, and therefore a lot more noise. And let's just take a quick listen to 1200 RPM versus 1700 RPM on this particular cooler. 1200 here. And this is 1700. Number 4, 8-pin cables are still around with this series. There will be a few XTs that use the 16-pin connector, but most of these will be 8-pin units. So to me, that's actually a plus over NVIDIA. The XT that I have here has 3 connectors. They don't strictly need to have that many. You'll see some AIBs only put 2. The 9070 has 2. The power draw wise, nothing too far beyond what GPUs had already been drawing down in recent years, right? And so if anything, the 16-pin connectors have had a lot of risk and headache for some. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? I get it. NVIDIA supplies 8-pin adapters, but why not just insert those 8-pin cables directly into the card? And that's what you get here. The other positive is if you're coming from an older PSU, you don't need those ugly adapters, or you also don't need to go out and look for a new power supply. Unless you are under spec, so 650 watts recommended for the 9070 and 750 watts on the 9070 XT. On that note, with the primes here, if you don't connect up the cables properly, you do get a handy red warning LED, and that is very helpful. It's a nice confirmation feature for what is actually a more base level card. So, they're including that on there. Highlight number 5. So ray tracing is still not great on the Radeon cards. Granted, none of these frame rates are particularly enjoyable, but it gives you an idea of the reshuffling that happens when you throw that ray tracing wrench into things. Here, both cards end up falling below the 5070. Even a different title, Black Myth Wukong, we do see that hierarchy really shuffle up again. So normally in this type of scenario, you would turn to upscaling, and AMD is rolling out FSR 4 to more titles. NVIDIA wants to really push MFG. Unfortunately, I haven't tested with the supported titles pre-launch, but I will say that this has been an area where NVIDIA holds an advantage, because in my experience with DLSS versus FSR, the visual quality and usability for a DLSS is very much easy to see. But I am very hopeful to see what FSR 4 can bring as the new titles that I've tested gain support, and I will be getting these cards at this point really for their raster performance. Okay, number 6, these cards have some small room for manual overclocking. I mentioned that the XT was seemingly pushed pretty hard already, but there is still room for additional OC on both cards if you want to tinker with it. So with the 9070, lifting the power limit 10% in GPU tweak drew down 253 watts of total board power and 424 watts at the wall. With the XT, the same adjustment ended up with almost 350 watts total board power and 549 at the wall. So it's a lot. On the synthetics, we'd see about 2 to 6% gains. In Cyberpunk, 3% for the XT and 5% for the non-XT. In Assassin's Creed Mirage, almost 8% for the XT and 6% for the non-XT. So there are absolutely gains there still, but you are going to be throwing a lot of power at it. And yeah, that 9070 XT is also going to be dumping a lot more heat into your system. So I wouldn't blame you if you want to just leave good enough alone, but there is still a little bit fun left for you there. Silicon lottery depending though, right? And the final number 7 item here is that AMD has a chance to gain some serious market share here, provided that these are available, and also if partners price reasonably close to the suggested pricing of $599 and $549 US for the XT and non-XT respectively. All they have to do is ensure that you can walk into a shop tomorrow, virtual or otherwise, and get a 9070 XT for $600. Because many prospective buyers have tried to get the so-called 749 MSRP 5070 Ti card and they can't. So if there are plenty of $600 9070 XTs available, then the perceived price gap for buyers is substantial. So if, and this is both a hopeful and cautious if you can find this card at close to these price points, then yes, I would absolutely recommend go for either of these. Both will be great. And even given the choice between a 749 5070 Ti, I would go for the XT without any hesitation if this were $600. So one thing I will note, pricing was not provided to me at the time that I had to film this. So if I do get that info, I'll either overlay it when I edit this or stick it in the comments. But I am very hopeful that Asus prices these very close to MSRP. And they will also have a tough model that's going to be above this stack as well. So these are both solid cards. And AMD is giving gamers what they want. 16 gigabytes of VRAM on a mid-range card should be the starting point in 2025. For me, the 9070 is just the bang-up legit card of this generation, and definitely look for a full build soon. Yeah, that's my launch review there. Availability is slated for 9 a.m. Eastern Time on March 6th. That's tomorrow. So I hope you go and get it and you're successful, because I haven't been excited about GPU launches lately, but this one really puts a smile on my face because it is exciting stuff. And well done, AMD. So please give a like, make sure you're subscribed. Check out the links down below if you're shopping. Big thanks for watching today.